The frontier roads of early America swallowed lives whole. Travelers vanished into the wilderness, their fate often lost to conjecture and local legend. But in the autumn of 1798, along a remote 20-mile stretch of the Wilderness Road in southeastern Kentucky, 17 travelers disappeared without a trace. What makes these vanishings so chilling isn't just the number, but the decades-long cover-up. Court records were deliberately sealed, hiding a truth so dark it defied belief. This is the story of a killing operation so methodical, so perfectly disguised as Christian charity, that it operated for 8 years undetected. The secrets of the Hardin family farm. Before we continue with the story of the farm that became Kentucky's first house of horrors, let's uncover the secrets that powerful families tried to keep buried forever. Subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy and hit that notification bell so you never miss these hidden, unsettling stories from history. Drop a comment telling us what state or city you are listening from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers. Southeastern Kentucky in 1798 was a land of raw promise and brutal danger. Millfield, a small township of barely 300 souls, sat at a crucial bend in the Wilderness Road, a haven of strict religious order founded by Virginia Baptists. The town's spiritual center was the New Jerusalem Baptist Church, led by the Harvard-educated Reverend Ephraim Cole. Among Millfield's most respected residents were the Hardins, Patriarch Ezekiel, his wife Temperance, and their 3 adult children, sons Caleb and Josiah, and daughter Mercy. They had arrived in 1791, claiming to be refugees from brutal Indian raids in Virginia, and quickly established themselves as pillars of the community. Ezekiel Hardin commanded respect with his imposing height and deep voice. Serving as a lay preacher, his sermons were legendary, filled with passionate descriptions of divine love and terrifying warnings about eternal judgment. People often remarked that he spoke with the authority of someone who had personally witnessed both heaven and hell. Temperance Hardin was equally impressive. A small, delicate woman, she became the community's unofficial physician. Her knowledge of healing herbs was encyclopedic, and her reputation for medical miracles meant many families owed their lives to her tireless care. Their children, the strong, dedicated Caleb, the quiet, intellectual Josiah, and the beautiful, sweet-natured Mercy, appeared to be perfect examples of frontier virtue. The Hardin farm spanned 400 acres of prime bottomland, a homestead that boasted luxuries rare on the frontier: glass windows, stone chimneys, and fine furnishings. Visitors often noted the farm's unusual prosperity. What made the Hardins particularly valued was their extraordinary hospitality to distressed travelers. Barely a week passed without Ezekiel riding out to assist an injured horse or stranded wagon, often inviting entire families to shelter at the farm. This was considered a Christian duty, but the Hardins took it to extraordinary lengths. Temperance was particularly known for her willingness to treat any injured or sick traveler, regardless of their ability to pay. The Hardins' reputation for charity was a beacon on the dark, treacherous Wilderness Road. But as exhausted travelers sought shelter within their prosperous walls, they had no way of knowing that the family's Christian virtue was merely the thin disguise for Kentucky's first and perhaps most sophisticated house of horrors. The Hardin family's reputation for hospitality was immense. Temperance even maintained a well-stocked infirmary in an outbuilding, using her advanced medical knowledge to save countless lives. Travelers were routinely directed to their farm for safe shelter. However, on October 13, 1798, the illusion began to crack. A reliable merchant named Samuel Fletcher failed to arrive in Lexington. 5 days past his schedule, his business partner, Thomas Grayley, began searching. Near Millfield, the trail went cold. The searchers eventually found Fletcher's horse grazing loose. The animal was healthy, saddled, but its bridle had been deliberately removed and hung on a branch, an act of human intervention. Since the merchant's trading goods and money were intact, simple robbery was ruled out. More disturbingly, Fletcher's personal effects were scattered in a line, suggesting he had been dragged away from the road. Constable Jacob Winters, a seasoned investigator, took charge. Fletcher's trail, marked by torn fabric and blood, led clearly toward the Hardin farm. But at the exact boundary of the Hardin property, every trace vanished completely, as if the merchant had been lifted into thin air. When Winters questioned Ezekiel Hardin, the patriarch was cooperative but strangely rehearsed. Ezekiel claimed Fletcher stopped briefly, insisted on taking a dangerous shortcut, and seemed nervous, mentioning strange men following him. The entire Hardin family, Ezekiel, Temperance, Caleb, Josiah, and Mercy, corroborated the account in exact, identical detail. This unnatural perfection, where no witness contradicted the other on even minor points, immediately raised the constable's suspicions. Winter's doubts deepened when he examined the farm. He noticed significant, unusual changes: a new smokehouse, unusually large and built with thick stone walls; fresh earth around several outbuildings, suggesting extensive recent digging. The root cellar had been substantially enlarged, appearing large enough to accommodate a wagon. Ezekiel offered plausible explanations, citing an exceptionally profitable harvest, but he chose his words with unusual care. Most disturbing of all, the family's famous warmth seemed forced, carrying an undercurrent of nervous energy that the veteran constable couldn't ignore. The initial encounter with Constable Winters left the Hardins shaken. Temperance's hands shook while serving coffee, and the children seemed subdued and watchful. But without concrete evidence, Fletcher's case was officially recorded as highway robbery. However, Fletcher's disappearance was just the beginning. Over the next 8 months, the vanishings continued with terrifying regularity, a new traveler disappearing every 2 to 3 weeks along the same 20-mile stretch of road. The victims were diverse: merchants, armed parties, small families, but all shared 2 facts: complete disappearance and being last seen heading toward or inquiring about the Hardin farm. Notable victims included Dr. Marcus Cromwell, November. His overturned wagon was untouched, but his valuable medical bag, containing specialized surgical tools, was missing, an item of no use to ordinary thieves. The Henley family, December. Jonathan, Elizabeth, and their 2 young children vanished in a blizzard. Their wagon was later found, pulled from the snowdrift and thoroughly searched. Their clothing and personal belongings were gone, but food remained. Tracks suggested multiple people had worked hard to free the vehicle. Reverend Nathan Cross, January. The fearless preacher disappeared, but his horse was found still carrying $200 in church donations, ruling out robbery as the motive. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: abandoned horses, scattered belongings, and a trail that led inevitably toward Hardin property before vanishing completely. Constable Winters was trapped. The Hardins, with Ezekiel's commanding sermons and Temperance's life-saving medical skills, were pillars of the community. To accuse them without ironclad proof would be professional suicide. Their consistently convenient explanations were plausible within the context of the dangerous frontier, but the sheer statistical clustering of the vanishings was impossible to ignore. Every search the family welcomed felt like mockery, as evidence evaporated like mist near their property. The first crack in the family's facade came from an unexpected source: 9-year-old Timothy Voran. In March 1799, Timothy approached Winters with a story that seemed like childish imagination, yet the boy claimed he had heard screaming coming from the direction of the Hardin farm at least 5 times over the winter. These were not screams of accident, but the sustained, desperate cries of someone in mortal terror, always during the darkest hours of night. Young Timothy Voran's testimony was dismissed by his parents as natural frontier sounds. However, the boy insisted the screaming, sometimes accompanied by rhythmic hammering, creak of pulleys, and multiple voices chanting, always ended abruptly. What gave Constable Winters pause was the chilling fact that the dates Timothy heard the screams corresponded exactly with the estimated time of a traveler's disappearance. The correlation was too precise to be coincidental. Armed with Timothy's disturbing statement, Winters began to build his case, conducting quiet, methodical interviews with neighbors. What emerged was a pattern of small inconsistencies previously ignored. Sarah Mitchell, the closest neighbor, recalled seeing lanterns and hearing heavy digging and construction late into the night. Temperance claimed they worked during cool hours on their root cellar, but the work went on for months longer than reasonable. Crucially, Sarah noted she never saw the massive amounts of excavated earth such digging should have produced. Henrik Johansson, the tracker, found animal bones scattered near the fence line. These weren't normal remains, but bones that were saw-marked, cracked, and processed with heat, suggesting systematic dismemberment, rather than decomposition or simple disposal of diseased animals, contradicting Ezekiel's explanation. Neighbors also reported a dramatic change in the Hardin family's behavior. The sons, Caleb and Josiah, became withdrawn and nervous. Mercy Hardin, once vivacious, now looked haggard and prematurely aged, shrinking from human contact as if guarding a terrible secret. Even Ezekiel's sermons took a dark turn, obsessively focusing on divine judgment and wrath instead of mercy. Winters also found disturbing gaps in the Hardins' background. They claimed to be refugees from Indian raids, yet inquiries in Virginia produced no records of any Hardin family being affected. Their arrival in Kentucky in 1791 seemed to mark the beginning of their documented existence, despite arriving with substantial wealth and fine possessions. The constable's investigation received an unexpected and alarming boost in April 1799. Isaac Brewster, a traveling peddler, arrived with information from eastern Tennessee. He spoke of a family named Harper, Zechariah, Prudence, and their 3 children, who operated a prosperous farm, and between 1789 and 1791 were linked to the disappearance of at least 15 travelers. The description of the Harpers and their activities so closely mirrored the Hardins that suspicion instantly transformed into near certainty. The similarities between the Tennessee disappearances and the Kentucky cases were staggering. Travelers vanishing near a highly respected farm run by a family of lay preachers and healers. The Harper family, Zechariah, Prudence, and their 3 children, perfectly matched the Hardins in description, activity, and false history. Most damning, the Harpers had vanished overnight in 1791, just as suspicion focused on their property. Tennessee authorities later searched the abandoned Harper farm, discovering dozens of shallow graves containing both animal and human remains, with personal effects linking them to the missing travelers. The killers had escaped, but their crimes had been confirmed. Winters realized the Hardins were not opportunistic murderers, but experienced serial killers who had learned from their mistakes and created a more sophisticated operation in Kentucky, likely responsible for an extensive killing spree. The weight of Isaac Brewster's testimony was compelling, but Winters knew that frontier justice demanded ironclad physical evidence before he could arrest such prominent citizens. The breakthrough he desperately needed came from the last source he expected, Mercy Hardin herself. On the night of May 22, 1799, Mercy, terrified and tear-streaked, appeared at Winters' cabin. What she revealed over the next 3 hours exposed the full, horrifying truth of the farm. According to Mercy's devastating confession, her family had been systematically murdering travelers for 8 years. Her father, Ezekiel, had convinced the family they were carrying out God's work by eliminating what he called unworthy souls. The murders were not random. They were carefully planned executions, serving Ezekiel's twisted sense of divine justice. The process was methodical and ritualistic. Evaluation. When promising targets arrived, Ezekiel would engage them in conversation, presenting himself as a concerned Christian to assess their moral character. He would quickly find them guilty. The wealthy were guilty of greed, the educated of pride, and even ministers of false piety. Poison and hospitality. Once Ezekiel pronounced his secret judgment, the family would invite the condemned to stay the night. The final course of the meal contained a virtually undetectable herbal drug cocktail perfected by temperance, which mimicked natural exhaustion. The underground courtroom. The drugged victims would awaken bound and helpless in the farm's subterranean chambers, a complex network of rooms and tunnels stretching nearly 200 yards beneath the surface. The largest chamber served as Ezekiel's courtroom, a grotesque parody of justice complete with iron shackles and religious symbols perverted into instruments of terror. We now stand inside Ezekiel's nightmare. The subterranean chamber, his courtroom, was the stage for formal trials where fates were sealed and verdicts were predetermined. These were more than just sadistic theater. They were the foundation of the family's twisted psychology. By framing the murders as acts of divine justice, sacrifices to purify the frontier, Ezekiel allowed his family to commit atrocities while maintaining their self-image as righteous Christians. The sentences varied. Some prisoners were kept alive for weeks or months, their skills exploited. Dr. Cromwell, the physician, was compelled to train Temperance in advanced surgical techniques before his death. Reverend Cross was forced to write sermons that Ezekiel later delivered, boosting his reputation as a biblical scholar. Others faced immediate execution through methods Ezekiel claimed were biblically sanctioned, such as hanging for thieves or drowning for pride. Mercy's testimony revealed the systematic nature of the family's crimes in terrifying detail, with each member assigned a specific role. Caleb and Josiah. They were the muscle, responsible for capturing victims, maintaining the complex, and disposing of bodies through a limestone cave system that connected to the deepest chambers. Mercy. She was the forced record keeper, maintaining detailed ledgers that documented every victim's identity, possessions, and method of disposal. Her careful handwriting filled dozens of notebooks that read like a merchant's inventory, except the goods were human lives. Temperance. Her role was perhaps the most crucial. She prepared the incapacitating drugs and served as the medical expert. Her knowledge of anatomy was perverted into an expertise in torture and murder. Most chillingly, she developed what she called treatments, calculated doses of pain and terror, designed to break a prisoner's will without causing death, ensuring their complete submission. The family's success depended on an elaborate system of disposal and deception. Bodies were never buried on the farm. Instead, they were transported through the cave system to remote limestone caverns miles away, providing ideal conditions for decomposition and making discovery virtually impossible. Personal belongings were sorted like merchant goods. Valuables were kept or sold in distant markets, while less valuable items were scattered along roads to create false trails suggesting simple robbery or Indian attacks. Their most ingenious deception was the use of their charitable activities to deflect suspicion. Every act of kindness, every sermon, every medical treatment provided a dual purpose, genuinely helping the community while creating a reputation that made the family virtually above suspicion. They even had contingency plans. If authorities grew too suspicious, they would increase their charitable works and prepare to abandon the farm, just as they had done in Tennessee. According to Mercy, the family had been planning to expand their operation significantly, aiming to establish what Ezekiel called courts of divine justice throughout the frontier. But what finally drove Mercy to confess was terror for her own life. She revealed that Ezekiel had become increasingly paranoid, viewing anyone who posed a threat, including neighbors, the peddler Isaac Brewster, and even Constable Winters himself, as deserving of judgment. More immediately terrifying, Mercy disclosed that multiple victims were currently being held in the underground chambers. A traveling surveyor named William Patterson, scheduled for trial the following night, a young woman named Rebecca Foster, and an elderly preacher named Luther Grimby. This revelation showed how dramatically the operation had escalated into something approaching an industrial killing operation. Winters realized that time had run out for careful investigation and legal procedures. The clock was ticking. If Mercy's information was accurate, William Patterson, Rebecca Foster, and Luther Grimby would die within hours. Constable Winters faced the most difficult decision of his career: attack the fortified, armed Hardin family alone, and risk everything, or ride for reinforcements, and almost certainly condemn the 3 prisoners to death. His choice was made easier by the courage of the community. Winters wouldn't have to act alone. A hastily assembled rescue party was formed, comprised of Henrik Johansson, the Swedish farmer and tracker with invaluable military experience; Isaac Brewster, the peddler, driven by guilt over failing to expose the Harpers in Tennessee; Benjamin Stokes, a former bounty hunter; Daniel Crawford, a veteran of Indian fighting. The plan was simple, brutal, and focused. Approach the farm after midnight on May 23rd using darkness and surprise. The primary objective was rescuing the imprisoned victims. Capturing the killers was secondary. Mercy provided critical intelligence. The underground complex had 2 entrances, the main root cellar and a concealed emergency exit a quarter-mile into the woods. Both were armed, and Ezekiel had drilled his sons in defensive tactics. The 5-man group moved with the silence of experienced hunters, using creek beds and tree lines for concealment. What they discovered at the property exceeded their worst expectations. The farm showed clear evidence of recent excavation, The air was thick with the smell of lime and decay. From beneath the deceptively calm main house, they could hear muffled voices, occasional screams that were quickly silenced, and the rhythmic sound of metal striking stone. The rescue operation began at 2 a.m. Winters and Johansson approached the main root cellar entrance, which was revealed to be a sophisticated fortification the Hardens had spent years perfecting. Stokes and Crawford secured the emergency exit. The raiders' greatest advantage was complete surprise. Complacency had set in after years of successful operation. Winters and Johansson descended into the complex, finding Ezekiel and his sons unprepared, focused on preparing their current victims for execution. The rescue was terrifyingly successful. They found William Patterson chained but alive. Rebecca Foster showed signs of Temperance's brutal psychological treatments. Luther Grimby was barely conscious, broken by weeks of captivity. But the prisoners were not the only occupants. As the raiders penetrated the cave system, they discovered evidence that defied human comprehension. The limestone chambers contained a charnel house of human remains spanning nearly a decade of systematic murder. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Mercy's detailed records. The notebooks documented 67 victims over 8 years, far exceeding investigation estimates and marking one of the most extensive killing sprees in American history. Ezekiel's courtroom. Displayed among the shackles and stone bench was a collection of personal trophies, scalps, jewelry, and weapons, a museum of murder that revealed the full extent of the family's sadistic pride. The capture of the Hardens was swift but violent. Ezekiel, showing no surprise, launched into a rambling sermon about divine judgment, even as gunfire echoed through the stone. Caleb and Josiah fought with desperate fury, using their intimate knowledge of the cave system to launch attacks from concealed positions. The battle raged through multiple chambers for nearly an hour, confirming the Hardens were prepared to die rather than face the justice they had denied their victims. The end of the siege came not from the raiders, but from Temperance, who, trapped above ground, attempted to destroy the evidence by setting fire to the main house. The rapidly spreading flames threatened to collapse the entrance to the underground complex, trapping everyone. Faced with burning alive, Ezekiel, Caleb, and Josiah finally laid down their weapons. Only Mercy surrendered willingly. Her cooperation was not a moral awakening, but a calculated move driven by terror that her father's growing paranoia would eventually mark her for execution. The aftermath of the capture sent shockwaves across the frontier. The subsequent investigation revealed that the cave system was far more extensive than imagined, stretching for nearly 2 miles. The evidence painted a picture of systematic murder spanning potentially decades. In addition to the 67 victims documented in Mercy's ledgers, searchers found clothing and toys, confirming that entire families, including the Henley children, had been murdered. The trial, beginning in late June 1799, drew immense crowds. Ezekiel Harden showed no remorse, using his testimony to deliver extended sermons, claiming every murder was an act of divine justice sanctioned by God to purge the frontier of sin and corruption. He insisted that he and his family were chosen instruments of God's wrath. Despite overwhelming evidence, Temperance and the sons maintained their innocence, claiming they were coerced by Ezekiel's fanaticism. However, evidence proved their enthusiastic and willing participation. Only Mercy expressed genuine remorse, though her motivation remained fear. Judge Samuel Whitmore's sentences were swift and decisive. Ezekiel, Temperance, Caleb, and Josiah Harden were all condemned to death by hanging on August 15, 1799. Exactly 1 year after Samuel Fletcher's disappearance first exposed their crimes. Mercy Harden received life imprisonment in exchange for her cooperation. The executions drew over 4,000 spectators. Ezekiel maintained his fanaticism to the very end, delivering a final rambling sermon cursing the community. Immediately after the executions, the Harden farm was burned to the ground, and the underground chambers were sealed with explosives and tons of rock, creating a tomb to ensure the victims rested in peace. The land was declared cursed. The Harden case established important precedents in frontier justice, requiring new laws for land purchases and protocols for missing persons. Most importantly, it served as a chilling warning against blind trust in religious authority and the vulnerability of isolated communities that valued reputation over vigilance. The case files were sealed by court order in 1801 to protect victims' families and prevent copycat crimes. For nearly 2 centuries, the truth was hidden, surviving only as folklore. The rediscovery of the case files in 1987 finally allowed the full story of Kentucky's first family of serial killers to be pieced together. Even today, the sealed caverns and the true extent of the Hardin's crimes remain unknown. The case forces historians to reconsider other unexplained disappearances along the frontier roads, suggesting that clusters of vanishings near other prosperous charitable families in other states may indicate that the Hardins were not unique. The answers may have died with Ezekiel Hardin, but the questions remain a chilling reminder that evil often wears the most innocent face, and that the frontier created perfect hunting grounds for predators who exploited the trust of vulnerable travelers. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about the Hardin family's crimes? Or might there be even darker secrets still buried beneath the Kentucky soil? Could similar families have operated in other frontier regions without ever being discovered? Leave your comment below and share your theories about this case. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The darkness of history holds many secrets, and we're here to uncover them all. See you in the next video on the Forgotten Liturgy.